everyone, welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be talking about how to draw like droplets, water droplets, ink droplets, blood droplets, liquid of various kinds. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop, so let's get arting. Alright, so I have, oddly enough, a lot of experience with drawing blood. I don't draw blood a lot when I'm doing animal portraits, but I tend to use it in almost every single art piece that I do. So, if you have an object here, and you have blood kind of dripping down off of it, or ink, could be either. I'll zoom in, nice and big here. Typically what I'm doing is, you come to the bottom of an object and you're going to have these drips coming off. And they don't have to be anything big, right? You have little drips here. They're different shapes, different sizes. You'll have gaps where there's nothing. You'll have where they're coming off a little bit further, and you just kind of want to build up this sense that there's a lot of things about to happen as it's dripping down and following an edge down. This is how you would do it. You have the tip of a pen or something. This is the sort of drips that you would have from all of that. So, you have these different sections, different ways that it looks, bulges versus full out, almost drips happening. And you want it to vary, so I usually kind of vary it pretty significantly. Right, so you end up with this kind of liquid-looking situation. You can also have a few where you do a few lines coming down and it looks like it's dripped off. And then, some actual drips coming down. It's fine. Oh, maybe not that one. But you get kind of that sensation, by doing that. You can really add these up. I mean, you would want to change the length and although you want them to go at the same angle, not like what I just did. But you can add drips underneath. It's probably a good idea, especially if you're doing an entire composition. But I'm not going to stop there. I'm going to take this purple and make it a little bit darker and add more. So we're going to do the same thing, still following this line up, because it's going to have some shadowing to it. I mean, that's the nature of blood. It's the nature of water droplets even. You're going to have some shadow to them because they're a ball. It's a ball of liquid that's very shiny. And as a result, you would shadow it kind of with that in mind, as if you were shadowing a ball. With a water droplet, it's a little bit different in that water droplets, you would see, the object behind. Whereas this ink or blood or something like that, you wouldn't necessarily see the object behind it. But being mindful of a light source, right? So as I am adding shadows to the back sides of these, because we're going to add a highlight to the front, right? So now I'm going to come in here. I'm going to get this white. I'm going to add highlights to this. Just a little bit of a dot. Maybe not even on all of it. Smaller sections, bigger sections. That tells us it's wet. Right? So if I pull back, it looks like this string, or whatever this is wet. Even when I zoom in, you kind of get that impression. So that's how you draw something that's wet. Now, for a better example, we could say that, you have like an ink pen or something, right? You have that ink pen coming down that has that center section and then the back coming off. And along that ink pen, you have ink dripping off of it. Well, let's change the color. Let's make it a nice blue. And you typically want it dark because you're going to want that highlight to really pop. But you don't want it, excessively dark because you're going to want to show up I want it to show up on black, right? So it's a nice mid or above, but that's going to be dark enough, right? So, you want to indicate there's some ink dripping down. I don't know how ink comes out of the tip, but maybe this one just exploded a little bit. And you have this little bit of accumulation happening where it's coming from all over, right? Coming from the backside, dripping down. And you want that to be a nice tip, and then have, we can have like one actually dripping off, but you probably want it straighter than that since it's not going to bend unless there's wind. You're going to have some little pieces coming off, little drips. And then if you wanted splatter, right, you would have this sort of splattering effect where you would do both dots and lines coming out from a center point where it's splattering down, and some splashing effect as some are hitting. So it's just this quick kind of motion, right? So as I come in, you have some splattering, some splashing happening, and then the sensation that all out from the center of this, you have some splattering, you have some dots. That's what's going to give it that effect that it's... And then you don't want them to end in kind of the same spot, so you want kind of that messy end to it. And if I don't want to add dark, I don't have to. From here I could literally just add that white. And we're going to get the sensation here that this is some wet pen ink dripping down, or something wet dripping down. And do the same down here, right? Because this is where it's landing. So this would also have some look to it. Right? So you back out and you have, ink droplets dripping down. So, it's a matter of doing kind of this. Oh, let me not do it in white. Oh, it's really close. Right, you have, just this, it doesn't have to be a perfect shape, but you have kind of, the idea being you have this sort of liquid bubble, potentially with other liquid bubbles. Very rarely is there just one bit of one droplet coming off. So usually there's multiple, right? So, you would have multiples coming down and around and blending together off of whatever line I'm imaginarily drawing on right now. And it would, have different shapes to it. And it would be attached to something, so whatever this is. And it would follow whatever, they're angling the way that gravity would be. So, I'm not going to have a droplet going this way. That's not where gravity is. It's pulling it down. Different heights, different things going on. Different stages of falling, right? A bubble that's close to falling is going to be pretty detached already, pretty close to it. It's going to be a little bit more formed, right? More like this. And great, but that's where you would want to add the highlight. Highlight wherever your light source is. Typically on the biggest bubbles, but not always. Sometimes I'll add it in other places if it just seems right that it needs to be there. Or I'll add it more in some areas than others. I mean, typically it's, I'm usually working on the smaller context, and in those aspects, you don't have a lot of space, and I don't really change my brush size. So my pen pressure is going to dictate how, you can see that's pretty thin or pretty thick. So pin pressure can do a lot as to how much I'm putting on as a highlight. So if I want to add a highlight to one of these little strips coming down, I could, but I'm probably not going to because it's such a small space. I'm usually reserving it for the big bubbles, and that's really what's going to be catching the light anyway. And you can kind of see that that makes this turn into right, that kind of water effect, that liquidy effect is adding that harsh highlight onto it that doesn't fade. So it doesn't take a lot of effort to give that illusion in this style. You know, you have a line that looks like it's dripping, and again, you can add the shadow in if you want. That'll give it more depth. Often, especially when I'm dealing with like blood or something, I typically am drawing shadows into it, so I'm not just sticking with this color. I'm adding in, you know, if I were doing this blue, I would add in a much darker blue to give it another effect. You'd add just a little bit on that back side, but not where the highlight is. Right, so all of this back here, actually adding it through here. And, you know, it's okay to look messy because that's not really going to hurt it in any way. It's still going to look like water. I mean, even when I drew it bigger, right, you got the impression that it was liquidy, right? And if we pull off now, it's got even more depth to it. And so that, you know, it's kind of up to you if you want to add in the that extra effect. Can be good though. It can add, certainly add some. I always do it when I'm drawing liquid. I typically add in more than just the base color, but you don't have to, because even without it, this certainly gets that effect. Right, so let's come back up to this brighter blue. Not much to it, right? You just kind of get a little bit of a bubble. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle. If you're doing multiples as you come down, now I don't usually do it this way, but right, you have different bits of oh, not jagged though. More smooth like the first one. You know, you have bits of bubbles coming, or water coming down, or ink, or whatever it is, and you would have, you know, this would be more like a bubble, some liquid about to drop, whereas this is one just forming, or a little deeper, or so you have different levels in this as to how far along the drip is, and that would be reflective of what's going to happen. And then all you have to do if one has fallen, right, so it would typically come off of this one, is you have this, you would just do a quick line. Not a lot of pin pressure. It's typically just a quick line going straight down. Sometimes my lines aren't all that straight. Doesn't have to be perfectly straight, but straighter than I was doing. And then often when I'm doing that, I'll add a dot somewhere underneath. You know, you can just do a little bit of a dot. On this one, it might be a little bigger, or, you know, like we did here, where we just drew in a horizontal splatter and then had some coming up and then spraying off of it. So a nice quick video. It's not a hard thing to draw necessarily, but there can be a lot of extra complication to it. I find it particularly effective. You definitely get that effect, you know, going through it, that you have something liquidy dripping down. But that's kind of the idea. That's what I'm doing. I'm honestly eyeballing it more than what I just did here, because I'm filling it in completely. But it is kind of that concept. You know, you have a line, and then you fill that in, and then you have another one, maybe a full drip coming off, and you fill that all the way in, and it doesn't have to be clean or nice. And then, you know, you're varying the lines. You don't want it to look like it's too perfect, too contrived, too, you know, oh, this is clearly somebody's drawn it, this strip's about to fall. You know, up and down, a little thicker. You want that indication it's coming. without necessarily dripping in all the places, but you know, when you have an edge like this, it would be imminently coming off wherever it could, depending on the angle. It will follow the path of least resistance, right? And you just kind of build it up. It's the way that liquid works. Just the most important thing is that highlight, honestly. So you have all these little bubbles coming off that don't look like much of anything. And then you can add a little bit of texture to these edges. That's fun, right? Like this whole thing is just one big bubbly mess. Not a perfect circle. But what's really going to turn that and make it something, you know, better is adding in the highlight, right? Once we get that in there, it'll look more like there's something there. Just stay consistent with whatever light source you've chosen. That's really the most important part with bubbles. Think of them like a ball. You know, you're making a little ball, and the ball has substance to it. So it's not just this blank ball. It's got weight to it. It's gonna have highlights and shadows to it, and that's what's gonna help make it pop, and what's gonna turn it into liquid, right? Liquid is so shiny, we expect it to be, and so if it doesn't have the sheen to it, it's not necessarily gonna tell us that's what it is. But once there's a shine to it, it's very clear, like, oh yeah, like that's liquid coming down in some form or fashion. So, and if, you know, this were like a water droplet on a background, you would have the color of the background kind of in the middle. It would be, you know, roughly through here, you'd have the color of whatever is in the background in the shape of the bubble that fades itself out into the shadows that would be around it. All edges would be in shadow like any normal circle, and then you're going to have the highlight hitting wherever that light source is kicking in. So, all right, so that is how you draw droplets. I hope that's helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.